Has your life ever felt, even for a fraction of a second, like a repetitive script you didn't choose? Waking up with that heavy feeling that something is deeply wrong with the world is not a symptom of stress. It is your consciousness detecting a flaw in the system. But the question no one wants to face is this: if quantum physics and mystics have already proven that this reality is a holographic projection, why do your exhaustion, your bills, and your crises still feel so dense, so real, and almost impossible to break? That brief moment of discomfort, that quiet sense that something is off, is not random. It's a glitch in the illusion. A small crack where your awareness stops fully believing the story it has been repeating for years. Most people ignore it and move on. But if you stay with it, even for a few seconds, you begin to notice something deeper. The problem may not be the world itself, but the way it is being perceived and held together inside you. You know that horrible feeling of studying the mechanics of the universe, trying to elevate your mental state, meditating, and at the end of the day facing the same anxiety hitting your chest. It feels like you are rowing against an invisible gravity pulling you back to zero. I know exactly how frustrating that is, and the liberating truth is that this constant exhaustion is not your fault. There is a quiet drain happening beneath the surface of your awareness, and it has nothing to do with your discipline, your intelligence, or your effort. In fact, the more effort you apply in the wrong direction, the stronger this drain becomes. It's subtle. It doesn't announce itself, but you feel it in your body. That heaviness behind your eyes, that tightness in your chest, that sense that something is always slightly off, even when everything seems fine. What's really happening is that your attention is being continuously pulled into maintaining the illusion without you realizing it. Not in a mystical, distant way, but in the most ordinary moments of your day. Every time your mind loops through the same worry, replays the same conversation, or anticipates the same problem, it is reinforcing a pattern that feeds on your awareness. And the strange part is, it feels like you're trying to solve your life when, in reality, you're recycling the exact structure that keeps it stuck. Think about how your day usually unfolds. You wake up, and before your feet even touch the ground, your mind is already active. It starts scanning what needs to be fixed, what might go wrong, what is missing. This scanning feels responsible, even necessary. But there is a hidden cost. Each of these thoughts carries a small charge of tension, and that tension accumulates. By the time the day ends, you are not just tired from what you did, you are drained from what you continuously held in your attention. And here is where most people misunderstand the process. They believe the exhaustion comes from external demands, work, responsibilities, relationships. But if that were entirely true, rest alone would solve it. And yet, you've probably experienced moments where you had time to rest, maybe even tried to disconnect, but the internal pressure didn't fully leave. That's because the drain is not outside. It is generated by a constant identification with the mental noise that sustains the illusion. There is a kind of background tension that becomes so familiar you stop noticing it. Like a faint buzzing sound that has always been there. You adapt to it. You build your life around it. But your system never truly relaxes. Even in silence, something in you remains slightly contracted, as if waiting for the next problem to appear. This is not your natural state. This is learned, reinforced, and repeated until it feels like who you are. And the more you try to fix this by forcing calm, by chasing positivity, or by trying to control every thought, the more energy you feed into the same loop. It's like trying to smooth water with your hands. The effort itself creates more disturbance. That's why so many people feel like they are doing everything right on the surface, but internally, nothing really changes. There's also something deeper that makes this drain almost invisible. It disguises itself as you, the voice that says, "You need to figure this out. You can't stay like this. Something is wrong." It feels personal. It feels urgent. But that voice is part of the mechanism. It keeps your attention locked inside a narrow band of perception, where the illusion appears solid, continuous, and unquestionable. If you look closely, you'll notice that this exhaustion is not constant in the same way physical fatigue is. It fluctuates depending on how entangled you are with your thoughts. There are brief moments, Maybe when you're fully absorbed in something simple, or when your mind pauses for just a second, where the weight disappears. Not because your problems are solved, but because your attention is no longer feeding them. Those moments are not accidents, they are clues. They show you that the drain is not coming from life itself, but from a specific way of relating to it. And once you start to sense that, even faintly, something shifts. Not a dramatic transformation, but a small crack in the certainty that this heaviness is inevitable. And that's where things begin to get interesting. Because hidden inside this constant drain is a very precise mechanism, almost like a silent error running in the background, that keeps the whole system locked in place. Most people never see it, even when they spend years trying to improve their lives. But once you recognize it, even briefly, you start to understand why all that effort hasn't been working the way you expected, and why the door has felt closed from the inside all along. What most people don't realize is that there is a mechanical, almost invisible error that 99% of them make precisely when they try to improve their lives. It is a defense instinct that tragically densifies the walls of the illusion around you and traps you from the inside. I'm going to reveal how to deactivate this critical error in moments, but first, we need to look at something unsettling about your own hands. Right now, without overthinking, look at your hands. Really look. Not as your hands, not as something you've seen 1,000 times, but as raw perception. Notice the shape, the texture, the subtle movement, the fact that they are simply appearing in your awareness. For a brief second, there is just seeing. No story, no label, no problem attached to them. Now almost instantly your mind steps in. It says, "These are my hands." It connects them to your identity, your past, your responsibilities. It pulls you back into the narrative of who you are and what you need to fix. That shift happens so fast you rarely notice it, but that exact movement, from pure observation into identification, is the silent error. This is the mechanism that locks the door. Every time something is perceived, your mind rushes to claim it, define it, and control it. A sensation in your chest becomes my anxiety. A challenge becomes my problem. A thought becomes my reality. And the moment that ownership is established, the illusion gains density. It becomes heavier, more personal, more urgent. At first, this seems harmless, even necessary. After all, how else would you function in the world? But here's the subtle distortion. You are not just using identification as a tool, you are unconsciously becoming everything you perceive. And when you become it, you lose the distance needed to see it clearly. This is why the harder you try to fix your inner state, the more stuck you feel. Because the one trying to fix the problem is already entangled in it. It's like trying to untie a knot while your fingers are tied into the knot itself. Every movement tightens it. The defense instinct behind this error is ancient. It is designed to protect you, to give you a sense of control and continuity. But in the context of awareness, it backfires. Instead of helping you navigate reality, it fuses you with the very patterns that are draining you. It convinces you that you must stay inside the illusion to manage it, when in fact, that is exactly what keeps it running. You can notice this most clearly in moments of stress. Something happens, a message, a memory, a sudden worry, and within seconds, your entire body reacts. Your breathing changes, your muscles tighten, your thoughts accelerate. It feels immediate and real. But if you slow it down even slightly, you'll see that the reaction is not coming directly from the event. It's coming from the identification with the thought about the event. And here is where the door quietly closes. You don't just experience the reaction, you become it. You say, "This is me, this is how I feel, this is my situation." And from that position, every solution you attempt is filtered through the same contracted state that created the problem. The illusion doesn't need to trap you by force. It only needs you to keep claiming everything that arises as me and mine. That's enough to keep the cycle intact. But something interesting happens when you interrupt this, even for a second. When you look at your hands and resist the automatic labeling, when you feel a sensation without immediately turning it into a story, there is a small gap. In that gap, the weight of the illusion softens. Not because anything external changed, but because you didn't complete the usual identification process. That gap is subtle, but it is powerful. It shows you that perception can exist without ownership, that experience can arise without becoming your identity. And in that space, the system loses its grip, even if just for a moment. The challenge is that this error is so fast, so deeply conditioned, that you don't see it happening in real time. You only feel its effects. The tension, the repetition, the sense of being stuck in the same patterns. It's like a program running in the background, shaping everything while remaining out of sight. But once you begin to catch it, even occasionally, something starts to shift. You realize that the solidity of your experience is not as fixed as it seems, that what feels dense and unchangeable may actually be held together by this constant act of identification. And this raises a deeper question that most people never stop to ask. If the world feels so solid, so stable, so undeniably real, what is actually holding it in that form? Because when you begin to loosen this silent error, even slightly, you start to sense that reality itself behaves more like something fluid, something responsive, something that depends on how it is being observed in the first place. Modern physics has already proven through the double-slit experiment that the matter your body and environment are made of is 99.9% empty space waiting to collapse. The world only solidifies into a rigid form in the presence of an observer. So what exactly is holding these probability waves in place and locking the scenario of your life into the same recurring pain? At first, this sounds distant, almost abstract. Something that belongs in laboratories, not in your daily routine. But if you bring it closer, it starts to feel less like theory and more like a mirror. Because the same principle that governs particles also reflects something about your own experience. What you consistently observe, you stabilize. What you repeatedly focus on, you give form. This doesn't mean you are magically controlling reality with your thoughts. That's a misunderstanding that creates more frustration than clarity. It's more precise than that. Your attention acts like a kind of selection mechanism. Out of countless possibilities that could unfold, it keeps returning to the same patterns, the same interpretations, the same emotional responses. And over time, those patterns begin to feel solid, predictable, almost inevitable. Think about how quickly your mind recognizes familiar problems. A small signal appears, a tone in someone's voice, a delay in a message, a slight discomfort in your body, and instantly your system fills in the rest. It predicts what this means, where it will lead, how it will end. And without realizing it, you are no longer seeing what is actually happening. You are seeing a reinforced version of what has already happened before. This is where the illusion gains its weight. Because what feels like a stable external reality is often a loop of internal confirmations. Your mind observes, interprets, and then observes its own interpretation as if it were objective truth. It's a closed circuit, and the more it repeats, the more real it feels. From a scientific perspective, this is not mystical, it's efficiency. The brain is designed to reduce uncertainty, to create quick models of the world so you can function without analyzing everything from scratch. But this efficiency comes at a cost. It trades openness for predictability. It filters out what doesn't fit the existing model and highlights what does. So even if reality at its core is fluid, your experience of it becomes rigid. And this is why change feels so difficult. Not because new possibilities don't exist, but because your attention is already committed to maintaining the old ones. It keeps collapsing the same wave into the same outcome, again and again. You can notice this in simple ways. Think of a situation that has been bothering you for a while. Now ask yourself, not what the situation is, but how you have been looking at it. Chances are the perspective hasn't changed much. The same thoughts appear, the same emotional tone follows, the same conclusions are drawn. It's not just the situation repeating, it's the observation pattern repeating. And as long as that pattern stays active, the illusion remains stable. There's also something else happening here that often goes unnoticed. The body begins to align with these repeated observations. If your attention frequently lands on stress, anticipation, or lack, your nervous system adapts to that baseline. It becomes your normal. And from that state, even neutral events can be interpreted as threats or problems, So now, it's not just your thoughts reinforcing the illusion, your biology is participating in it. This is why it feels so convincing. It's not only mental, it's embodied. It shows up in your posture, your breathing, the way you scan your environment. It becomes a full experience, not just an idea. But here is the subtle opening. If observation is part of what stabilizes your experience, then a shift in observation, even a small one, begins to loosen that stability. Not by force, not by trying to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, but by noticing how the observation itself is happening. By seeing the tendency to jump to conclusions, to solidify what is still fluid, to turn possibility into certainty too quickly. In those moments where you pause, where you don't immediately collapse the experience into a fixed meaning, something different becomes available. The situation may still be there, but it feels less dense, less final. There is space again, and that space is not empty in a negative sense. It is open, responsive, unfinished. The challenge is that this requires a different kind of attention. Not the kind that tries to control or predict, but the kind that simply observes without rushing to define. And for most people, this feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable at first, because it removes the sense of control they are used to. But staying in that openness, even briefly, begins to reveal something important. The solidity of your reality is not as fixed as it appears. It is being continuously shaped, moment by moment, by how it is observed and interpreted. And if that is true, then the real question is no longer just about what you are experiencing, but about the energy you are using to sustain that experience. Because if attention can stabilize a pattern, it can also overload it. And when that happens, when the system is pushed beyond a certain threshold, it doesn't just stay the same, it starts to break down in ways that feel sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to control. If you don't interrupt this mechanism now, the situation escalates into something critical very quickly. The hologram we live in is not passive. It requires a continuous source of energy to remain solid. When problems drain your attention and you enter chronic panic, your biological system short-circuits. Today's small stress becomes tomorrow's avalanche that sinks your reality simply because your reactivity is the fuel of chaos. At first, it doesn't look serious. It feels like a normal day with a few pressures, a few concerns, a few things to handle. But underneath, something is accumulating. Every moment of tension that is not seen clearly gets stored in your system. Not just as a memory, but as a physical imprint. Your shoulders tighten, your breathing becomes shallow, your mind speeds up. And slowly, without you noticing, your baseline state shifts from calm presence to subtle survival mode. This is how the avatar begins to destabilize. Your body is incredibly intelligent, but it is not designed to live in constant alert. When your attention keeps feeding the same loops of worry and anticipation, your nervous system starts to treat those patterns as signals of danger. It doesn't distinguish between an actual threat and a repeated thought. To your biology, both feel real, and so it prepares you over and over again for something that never fully arrives. That preparation has a cost. Your energy becomes fragmented. Instead of being available for clear action, it is constantly redirected into managing internal noise. You may still function, still go through your routines, still make decisions, but there is a growing sense of strain behind everything. Simple tasks feel heavier, small problems feel larger than they are, and your capacity to respond with clarity begins to shrink. This is where the illusion tightens its grip in a very convincing way. Because from inside this state, it looks like the world itself is becoming more difficult. It feels like circumstances are piling up, like life is becoming more demanding. But what's actually happening is that your system is losing its ability to process reality without distortion. The more overloaded you become, the more reactive your perception gets. And the more reactive your perception, the more chaotic reality appears. It's a feedback loop. And if it continues unchecked, it reaches a tipping point. What started as manageable stress turns into overwhelm. What felt like occasional anxiety becomes a constant background presence. And eventually, even small triggers can cause disproportionate reactions. Not because you are weak, but because your system has been running beyond its natural capacity for too long. This is what collapse really looks like. Not a dramatic external event, but an internal saturation point where your usual ways of coping stop working. The strategies that once gave you control begin to fail. Pushing harder doesn't help. Thinking more doesn't solve it. Even distraction loses its effect. And in that moment, it can feel like you are trapped inside your own experience with no clear exit. But there is something important hidden inside this collapse. It reveals that the identity you've been operating from, the one trying to manage everything, control everything, fix everything, is not as stable as it seemed. It depends on a constant supply of energy, attention, and effort to maintain itself. And when that supply is exhausted, the structure starts to crack. This can feel threatening because it challenges the sense of who you think you are, but it also opens a possibility that is usually overlooked. If this you can become overwhelmed, if it can break under pressure, then maybe it is not the most fundamental part of your experience. Maybe it is something constructed, something maintained. And if that's the case, then the illusion is not just outside you, in the world you perceive. It is also inside, in the identity you've been trying so hard to protect and stabilize. When this realization begins to surface, even faintly, something shifts. Not in the external situation, not in the immediate challenges you face, but in how seriously you take the internal turbulence. There is a small distance that starts to appear, almost like watching a storm, instead of being fully inside it. And in that distance, your system gets a brief moment to breathe. Because the truth is, the collapse is not caused by reality itself. It is caused by the continuous friction between what is happening and the way you are trying to control or resist it. That friction generates heat, pressure, and eventually exhaustion. Remove even a fraction of that friction, and the entire dynamic begins to change. The question then is not how to fix everything at once, but how to interrupt the cycle in real time before it builds into another wave of overload. There is a very precise point where this can happen. Not hours later, not after everything calms down, but right in the middle of the reaction itself. A tiny window that most people overlook because they are too immersed in what they are feeling. And yet, that small window holds more power than any long strategy or complex method, because it exists exactly where the illusion is being sustained, and where it can begin to lose its energy. Here is a practical micro-key for you to cut off the energy of this mental overheating today. When stress hits, do not try to force positive thoughts. Simply direct your attention to the millisecond of silence that exists between the end of one anxious thought and the beginning of the next. Living in that fraction of emptiness instantly pulls the plug from the simulation that is trying to drain your vitality. At first, this might sound too subtle to make any real difference. Your mind is used to solutions that feel active, effortful, and visible. It wants something to do, something to fix, something to replace the discomfort. But this approach works in the opposite direction. Instead of adding more activity, it reveals what is already there beneath the noise. Right now, if you slow down just enough, you can notice that your thoughts are not continuous. They appear one after another like frames in a film, and between those frames there is a gap. It's brief, almost unnoticeable, but it exists. A tiny pause where nothing is being said, nothing is being judged, nothing is being pushed or resisted. That pause is not created by you. It's already there. The problem is that your attention is usually too occupied to detect it. It jumps from one thought to the next so quickly that the gap disappears from your experience. And when that happens, the illusion feels solid and uninterrupted, like a constant stream you cannot step out of. But the moment you catch even a glimpse of that gap, something shifts, not because the external situation changes, but because your relationship to the flow of thoughts changes. You are no longer completely carried by it. There is a small space where you are simply aware, and in that space, the intensity drops. Imagine you are listening to a loud, chaotic noise. If you focus only on the noise, it feels overwhelming. But if you begin to notice the silence between the sounds, even briefly, the entire experience becomes less dense. The noise is still there, but it no longer fills everything. This is exactly how the illusion begins to lose its grip, because what keeps it alive is not just the presence of thoughts, but your continuous involvement with them. The moment that involvement is interrupted, even for a fraction of a second, the system loses part of its energy source. You don't need to stop your thoughts. You don't need to control your emotions. You only need to notice what is already happening in between them. And this is where it becomes practical. The next time you feel stress rising, not hours later but right in the moment, instead of trying to calm yourself down, just watch. Let the thought complete itself. And before the next one fully forms, place your attention in that tiny pause. It might last less than a second, but in that second, there is no problem, no identity to defend, no future to predict. Just a simple, open awareness. At first, you may only catch it occasionally. The mind will quickly pull you back into its Pravichnyi rhythm, filling the space again with commentary and reaction. That's normal. The habit is strong. But each time you notice the gap, even briefly, you weaken that habit. And something interesting begins to happen. The gap starts to feel more familiar, less like an accident and more like a place you can return to. Not by force, but by recognition. It's like discovering a quiet room in a house you've lived in your entire life but never entered. From that room, everything outside is still visible. Your thoughts, your emotions, your circumstances, they don't disappear, but they no longer define the entire space of your experience. This changes how your system responds. Your body begins to relax, not because you told it to, but because the constant signal of urgency is no longer uninterrupted. Your breathing deepens naturally. Your perception becomes less narrow, and without trying to fix anything, you start to see more clearly what actually needs attention and what is just noise. The illusion depends on continuity. It needs your thoughts to flow without interruption, your reactions to follow automatically, your attention to stay locked in the same patterns. The gap breaks that continuity. Even if nothing else changes, that break is enough to begin shifting the entire dynamic. And once you start to trust this, even slightly, you realize something that goes against everything you've been taught. You don't need to fight your mind to be free from it. In fact, every attempt to fight adds more movement, more noise, more friction, which leads to a deeper misunderstanding that keeps many people stuck for years. The belief that growth, healing, or awakening requires struggle, resistance, and constant effort, when in reality, that very fight may be the thing reinforcing the walls of the illusion in the first place. And this is exactly where everything you've been taught about spiritual growth and success reveals itself as a perfect trap. You were told that you need to fight the system, battle your demons, and overcome matter through force. But listen carefully. The opposite of illusion is not war. War creates magnetic friction, and friction gives mass and gravity to the hologram. The more you fight your current reality, the thicker and more unbreakable the walls of your labyrinth become. It sounds counterintuitive at first, almost wrong, because effort feels productive, struggle feels like progress. When something is uncomfortable, your instinct is to push against it, to remove it, to replace it with something better. That's how you've learned to solve problems in the external world. But internally, this same strategy creates the very thing you're trying to escape. Every time you resist a thought, you are still engaging with it. Every time you try to suppress a feeling, you are giving it importance. The mind doesn't register your intention to get rid of something. It only registers your attention on it. And attention is energy. So even rejection becomes a form of reinforcement. This is how the illusion sustains itself in a very subtle way. You think you are breaking free, but you are actually staying in constant contact with what you want to avoid. It's like trying to push a door closed while standing on the wrong side of it. The more force you apply, the more you remain exactly where you are. And over time, this creates exhaustion. Not just physical tiredness, but a deeper kind of fatigue that comes from constant internal conflict. Part of you wants peace, while another part is constantly scanning for what is wrong. One side is trying to improve, while the other keeps generating problems to solve. It becomes a loop with no clear exit. You can see this clearly in moments when you try to fix your mood. You notice anxiety, and immediately there is an urge to calm down, to think positively, to regain control. But underneath that effort, there is a hidden message. This should not be happening. And that message creates resistance. That resistance is friction. And friction is what gives density to the illusion. Without friction, experiences would pass through you more freely. Thoughts would arise and dissolve without leaving a heavy trace. Emotions would move without turning into long-lasting states. But when you fight them, you slow them down. You trap them in your system. You turn temporary waves into something that feels permanent. This doesn't mean you should become passive or indifferent. It doesn't mean you ignore problems or stop taking action in your life. The shift is more precise than that. It's about removing the internal struggle while still allowing intelligent action to happen. You can respond to a situation without fighting your own experience of it. That's the difference most people miss. When something difficult arises, there are two layers. The first is the situation itself. The second is your resistance to it. And most of the suffering comes from the second layer, not the first. But because they happen almost at the same time, they feel like a single thing. So you end up trying to fix the entire experience, when in reality only one part of it needs to be seen clearly. If you stop adding resistance, even briefly, something surprising happens. The intensity of the experience begins to change on its own. Not because you forced it, but because you removed the extra pressure that was holding it in place. It's like loosening your grip on a rope you didn't realize you were pulling. And in that moment, you start to feel a different kind of strength. Not the strength that comes from control, but the one that comes from not being entangled. A quiet stability that doesn't depend on everything going your way. This is where the illusion starts to thin out, because it relies on your constant engagement, your reactions, your need to fix and control. When that engagement softens, even slightly, the entire structure becomes less rigid. Situations still exist, challenges still appear, but they don't carry the same weight. And yet, there is one last layer that makes this difficult to sustain. Even if you understand that fighting doesn't work, even if you begin to let go of resistance, there is still a voice inside that keeps pulling you back. A voice that comments, judges, reacts, and tries to take control again. It feels like you, it sounds like you. And because of that, it's easy to believe that it is you. But what if that assumption is the deepest part of the illusion? What if the real shift is not in changing that voice, not in silencing it, but in recognizing that the one who notices it is not the voice at all? Remember that dangerous error I mentioned earlier that keeps you trapped? The fatal mistake is believing that the desperate voice inside your head, the one that judges and suffers, is who you truly are. The great shift to deprogram the matrix lies here. The one who notices this is no longer inside the illusion. The one who observes the mind working is not the mind. You are the infinite silent space where that voice echoes. This is not a poetic idea. It is something you can verify directly right now without needing to believe anything. Close your eyes for a moment and notice a thought as it appears. Maybe it's a comment about what you're hearing. Maybe it's a doubt. Maybe it's just a random image. Whatever it is, it shows up on its own. Now ask yourself very simply, if you can notice that thought, can you be the same thing as it? The thought changes. It comes and goes. But something remains aware of it. That awareness does not come and go in the same way. It doesn't argue. It doesn't rush. It doesn't try to prove anything. It just sees. And yet for most of your life, you've been trained to identify with the content of what is seen, not with the fact that you are seeing it. This is where the illusion becomes deeply convincing, because the voice in your head is not random. It is shaped by your past, your experiences, your fears, your desires. It carries a sense of continuity. It remembers, compares, projects. It creates a storyline that feels personal and consistent. And because of that, it feels like me. But if you slow down and observe it carefully, you'll notice something surprising. That voice is not stable. It shifts depending on your mood, your environment, your level of energy. Sometimes it's critical, sometimes it's hopeful, sometimes it's anxious, sometimes it's calm. It contradicts itself, it changes its position, it reacts automatically. What you truly are cannot be something that's unstable. And this is the opening. Because once you see that the voice is something you can observe, even for a brief second, a separation begins to form. Not a physical separation, but a shift in identity. You are no longer fully merged with the narrative. You are aware of it. At first, this might feel subtle, almost insignificant. The thoughts are still there. The emotions still arise. The situations in your life don't immediately change, but something fundamental is different. You are no longer completely inside the stream. It's like sitting by a river instead of being carried by it. You can still see the current, you can still hear the noise, but you are not being pulled in the same way. And this changes everything about how the illusion operates. Because the illusion depends on identification. It needs you to believe that every thought is yours, that every emotion defines you, that every reaction is who you are. The moment that belief weakens, even slightly, the structure starts to lose its foundation. You don't need to destroy the voice. You don't need to silence the mind. In fact, trying to do that would pull you back into the same trap. The shift is not about control, it's about recognition. The recognition that you are the one who notices, and the one who notices is already free from what is being noticed. You can test this in real time. The next time a strong thought appears, something like, "This is not working," or "I can't handle this," instead of engaging with it, just pause and look at it. Not the content, but the fact that it is appearing. There is a quiet awareness there before the reaction begins. That awareness is not stressed, it is not overwhelmed, it is simply present. And even if the mind continues to react, even if the body still feels tension, that underlying awareness remains untouched. It does not carry the weight of the illusion in the same way the mind does. This is why, when this realization deepens, something begins to lift from your system. Not because your life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you are no longer placing your entire identity inside every passing experience. The pressure to control everything starts to fade, the urgency softens, and for the first time you begin to sense what it means to be here without being trapped in what is happening. But this shift is not meant to stay only as an idea or a momentary glimpse. When it begins to settle deeper, not just in your thinking but in your body, in your nervous system, it creates a very different way of moving through the world. A way where challenges can still exist, but they no longer penetrate you in the same way. Where reactions may still arise, but they don't define you. Where life continues to unfold, but something in you remains untouched at the center of it all. When this realization reaches not only your intellect but your biology, an overwhelming weight disappears from your shoulders. The compulsive need to fix the external world dissolves. Your human avatar still has practical challenges to solve, but your original consciousness enters a state of pure untouchability, watching the drama unfold without merging with it. This is where the shift becomes real. Not as an idea you remember when things are calm, but as a living experience that stays with you even when pressure rises. The same situations that used to pull you in completely still happen. Conversations, deadlines, unexpected problems. But something in you no longer collapses into them. You begin to notice a quiet stability underneath everything. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. Emotions still move through your body. You can still feel frustration, uncertainty, even fear. But they don't stick in the same way. They pass more quickly, like weather moving across the sky instead of storms you are trapped inside. Before, every emotional wave felt personal. It felt like it defined your state, your day, sometimes even your identity. Now there is space around it. You feel it, but at the same time you are aware of it. And that awareness creates a kind of natural immunity. Not immunity in the sense of blocking experience, but in the sense of not being consumed by it. This changes how your body responds. Your breathing becomes less reactive. Your muscles don't tighten as quickly. Even when tension appears, it doesn't escalate into the same level of overload. It's as if your system has learned that it doesn't need to go into full defense mode every time something uncertain happens. And this is important because the illusion feeds on that automatic escalation. It relies on your system interpreting everything as urgent, personal, and threatening. The moment that interpretation weakens, the chain reaction begins to break. What used to turn into hours of stress may now dissolve in minutes. What used to spiral into overthinking may now pass as a simple observation. You start to trust that not every internal movement needs your intervention. There is also a shift in how you relate to control. Before, control felt necessary. You needed to manage outcomes, predict problems, stay ahead of everything. It felt like the only way to stay safe. But now you begin to see that much of that effort was coming from identification with the illusion, from the belief that you were inside every situation, responsible for holding it all together. As that belief loosens, your actions become more precise. You still respond to what matters, but you stop trying to control what doesn't. There is less noise in your decisions, less urgency behind your actions, and strangely, things often work more smoothly. Not because you are forcing them, but because you are no longer adding unnecessary friction. This doesn't mean life becomes passive or detached in a cold way. In fact, the opposite happens. You become more present, more available, more clear, because your energy is no longer tied up in constant internal resistance. You can listen more fully, act more directly, rest more deeply. And even when something intense happens, there is a sense that it is moving through you, not defining you. This is what it means to stand at the center of the storm without being the storm. The illusion may still generate movement around you, challenges, changes, unpredictability, but it no longer has the same power to pull you out of yourself. There is a center that remains steady, not because you are holding it in place, but because it was never unstable to begin with. The mind may still try to pull you back. Old patterns may still appear. There will be moments where you get caught again, where you react, where you forget. That's part of the process. But now, even those moments are seen differently. They don't feel like failures. They feel like temporary identifications that can be noticed and released. And each time you notice, the stability deepens. You begin to realize that this immunity is not something you create. It is something that was always there, hidden beneath layers of identification and reactivity. What you are doing is not building it, but uncovering it. And as it becomes more familiar, something else starts to emerge. Your relationship with reality itself begins to change. Situations that once felt fixed and heavy start to feel more fluid. Patterns that seemed solid begin to loosen. And without forcing anything, without trying to manipulate outcomes, you start to see subtle shifts happening around you. As if the world is responding differently, not because you are controlling it, but because you are no longer reinforcing the same density that kept everything locked in place. The moment you turn off internal resistance and sit in the seat of the silent witness, the quantum physics of your environment responds almost immediately. Without your friction and desperation, old obstacles lose their magnetism and dissolve on their own. Synchronicities and unpredictable doors begin to appear because the universe no longer finds in you a wall of density to collide with. At first, this can feel almost too subtle to trust. You're used to measuring progress through effort, through visible struggle, through the sense that you are pushing life forward. But here, the movement is different. It doesn't come from force. It comes from the absence of interference. Think about how many situations in your life were not just difficult because of what was happening, but because of the tension you added to them. The overthinking, the anticipation, the need to control every detail. That tension acted like static in a signal, distorting your perception and limiting your responses. When that static begins to fade, clarity returns naturally. You start to see options that were always there but were hidden behind mental noise. Conversations become simpler because you are actually listening instead of preparing your next move. Decisions become clearer because they are not filtered through layers of fear and urgency. This is what a zero-friction state feels like. Not the absence of challenges, but the absence of internal resistance to them. And this is where the illusion begins to lose its structure in a very practical way, because the illusion depends on your constant reaction. It feeds on the tension between what is happening and what you think should be happening. Remove that tension, and the system has nothing to amplify. Situations that once felt heavy begin to feel lighter, not because they disappeared, but because you are no longer adding weight to them. You may notice small shifts first. A problem you've been stuck on suddenly has a simple solution. A conversation that you expected to be difficult flows more easily. An opportunity appears without you forcing it. These moments might seem like coincidence, but they follow a pattern. They happen when you are not entangled, when your attention is open instead of contracted. There is also a change in timing. When you are in resistance, everything feels delayed or blocked. You push and nothing moves. You wait and frustration builds. But when that resistance drops, things often align in unexpected ways. not always instantly, but with a kind of natural rhythm that doesn't require you to chase it. It's as if life reorganizes itself when you stop interfering with it. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. You still act, but your actions come from clarity instead of pressure. You respond to what is in front of you without carrying the weight of everything that could go wrong. And because of that, your actions are more effective. There is less wasted energy, less second-guessing, less internal conflict. You do what needs to be done, and then your mind is free again instead of replaying it over and over. The body reflects this shift as well. There is a sense of ease that starts to replace the constant background tension. You may notice your breathing becoming slower, your movements more relaxed, your focus more stable. Not because you're trying to control your body, but because it is no longer reacting to a constant stream of perceived threats. This is where the experience of reality itself begins to feel different. The same world, the same environment, the same people, but a different quality to everything. Less heaviness, less urgency, more space between things, and in that space, more possibility. The illusion, which once felt dense and unchangeable, starts to reveal its fluid nature. But there is an important detail here that can easily be misunderstood. This shift is not about creating a perfect external life where nothing goes wrong. Challenges will still appear. Uncertainty will still exist. The difference is in how those moments are met. Without friction, even difficulty moves differently. It doesn't stick. It doesn't spiral in the same way. It arises, it is seen, it is handled, and it passes. And in many cases, what once looked like an obstacle turns into something useful, something that redirects you in a better way. This is why people sometimes describe this state as being in flow, but even that doesn't fully capture it. Because it's not something you enter and leave, it's what remains when the unnecessary tension is gone. And yet, living this way doesn't mean stepping out of the world or avoiding responsibility. In fact, the real test of this shift is not in quiet moments, but in how you move through everyday life, work, relationships, decisions, commitments. Because the question is no longer whether you can feel this clarity in isolation, but whether you can carry it into the complexity of the human experience without losing it. This does not mean abandoning the world or escaping to the mountains. True mastery is remaining in the material world, building abundance, forming relationships and living fully, but doing all of this with the quiet smile of someone who is no longer a prisoner of their own avatar. You continue playing the three-dimensional game, but with the unshakable calm of someone who has finally decoded the source code. From the outside, your life may not look dramatically different. You still wake up, make decisions, deal with responsibilities, interact with people. But internally, the position has changed. You are no longer acting from inside the noise. You are acting from a place that sees the noise without being controlled by it. It's like moving from being an actor lost in the role to sitting in the director's chair. The scene is still playing. The lines are still being spoken. But now there is awareness of the whole frame. You can see the reactions forming before they fully take over. You can feel emotions without immediately becoming them. And because of that, you gain a kind of freedom that is not dependent on changing the script. This is where the illusion becomes transparent, not in the sense that it disappears, but in the sense that you can see through it while still participating in it. You understand that your thoughts, your roles, your challenges are part of the experience, not the core of who you are. And this understanding allows you to engage with life more intelligently. You no longer need to overreact to every situation. You don't need to defend an identity at all costs. You don't need to control how everything unfolds to feel stable. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are not limited to the character you are playing. And this changes how you relate to success, failure, and everything in between. Success becomes something you can enjoy without clinging to it. Failure becomes something you can learn from without collapsing into it. Both are seen as movements within the same field of experience, not as definitions of your worth or your direction. There is also a shift in how you connect with others. When you are no longer fully identified with your own internal narrative, you stop projecting it as strongly onto the people around you. You listen more clearly. You react less defensively. You allow others to be as they are, without needing them to confirm your expectations. This creates a different kind of relationship dynamic, one that is less based on control and more based on presence. And interestingly, this often brings more harmony, not because you are trying to create it, but because you are no longer adding unnecessary tension to the interaction. Your actions also become more aligned. Instead of being driven by fear, urgency, or the need to prove something, you start to act from clarity. You see what needs to be done, and you do it. Not perfectly, not without challenges, but without the extra layer of internal conflict that used to complicate everything. This is what it means to play the game without being trapped by it. You still care, you still have goals, you still move forward. But the weight is different. The pressure is lighter, the sense of struggle is reduced. The illusion loses its ability to convince you that everything is as serious as it appears. And yet, you don't become careless or disconnected. In fact, your engagement becomes more precise. You are present where it matters, and not lost where it doesn't. You invest energy where it can actually create movement, instead of wasting it on mental loops that go nowhere. There is also a deeper sense of trust that begins to emerge. Not blind trust that everything will go your way, but a grounded sense that you can handle whatever arises without losing yourself in it. Because you have already seen that what you truly are is not fragile in the way the mind suggests. This trust allows you to take action without hesitation and rest without guilt. It allows you to move through uncertainty without needing constant reassurance. And as this becomes more stable, life starts to feel less like something you are trying to survive, and more like something you are actively participating in with awareness. But even here, there is a subtle edge to be aware of. Because the mind can still try to turn this into a new identity, the one who is aware, the one who understands, the one who is free. And if that happens, the illusion quietly rebuilds itself in a more refined form. So the invitation is not to become someone new, but to remain as the one who sees without needing to define it, and to keep noticing, again and again, that what you are is not contained in any role, any thought, or any experience, even the most elevated ones. The walls of this reality only seem solid to the one who has forgotten they are made of space, light, and consciousness. The next time the system tries to convince you that you are trapped, do not react and do not fight. Simply take a step back inside your own mind and observe the one who suffers. The exit door has always been unlocked. The one who notices this is no longer inside the illusion. If this clicked for you, write this in the comments. I am the one who notices. This is how I know you made it all the way here. And if this perspective brought you even a moment of clarity, watch one of the videos on your screen right now. It will help you go deeper. If you want to support the channel and access upcoming exclusive content, consider becoming a member.